estudiando el rol de Elena de White en el establecimiento de los fundamentos de la manera de pensar de la filosofía educativa adventista, un papel extraordinario, porque esta dama había cursado apenas 3 años de escuela primaria. ¿Cómo es que piensa en forma tan amplia y tan sólida? Bueno, hay que recordar que era una persona muy lectora, una persona que no estaba ajena a la problemática y a las discusiones de la cultura de su tiempo. Y por los 1860, 1870, 1880, en los Estados Unidos había una discusión muy animada sobre el futuro de la educación en todos los niveles, pero particularmente a nivel universitario.
Un momento de un torbellino educativo, donde había una contraposición de las teorías de la educación tradicional, con un movimiento de la educación activa, con el inicio de las tendencias evolucionistas, con una iglesia protestante que trataba de mantener un modelo. Y ella recibe de Dios el primer mensaje.
Ellen White was our main theorist, our main ideologue on education. And it was from her ideas of education, first articulated in 1872 in a piece called Proper Education, which later appeared in Testimonies Volume 3, in which she articulated the core of our philosophy of education.
Desde su primer artículo sobre la educación, en 1872, titulado La educación apropiada, Elena de White mantuvo una incesante correspondencia con diversas personas de influencia e instituciones para orientarlos acerca del desarrollo y la aplicación de la filosofía de la educación adventista. Pero no fue hasta 1903, aquí, en su último hogar en California, que ella dedicó tiempo específico para escribir un libro sobre este tema que tanto la apasionó durante toda su vida, la educación.
La educación en Estados Unidos en esa época estaba en un movimiento revolucionario. Si nosotros los educadores miramos la historia de la educación 1872, vamos a encontrar a John Dewey, por ejemplo, que comenzó a hablar de la educación activa. Es decir, el niño no solo tiene que desarrollar su mente, sino su cuerpo, sus habilidades. La educación debe ser práctica, debe ser aplicada. Y esto era un movimiento en contra del movimiento escolástico de estudiar latín y griego, que era lo que se estudiaba entonces como el sumum bonum de la educación. Así que esos movimientos fueron precursores. Al mismo tiempo, Charles Darwin estaba iniciando sus publicaciones con la teoría de la evolución, que impactó muy fuertemente en la educación. Así que en medio de ese movimiento y con las tendencias de la educación protestante de la época,
esas discusiones Elena de White las conocía. Y entonces ella, además de sus lecturas y de sus reflexiones, ella es guiada por Dios para ver el nuevo modelo de educación que la Iglesia Adventista necesitaba, si es que quería mantener su identidad y cumplir su misión.
If you look at the history of education in the United States at the time, there was a big argument about whether science was the knowledge of most worth, or whether it was the classics, or whether it was the skills to do a job. And Ellen White comes along and she says science is important and the skill to do a job is important. And so she doesn't see a battle and a war. She says some of the classical stuff is not so important. But even there, she said, we need to understand philosophy. We need to understand the way people think if we want to minister to them. So what Ellen White says, all of these things are important. But the most important thing, the real knowledge of most worth, is the knowledge of God, the experiential knowledge of God. And the way that we gain that experience is through His Word.
Ellen White's main ideas on education are, first off, centered in the Bible. For her, and if you read her writings, you see it, the Bible is the point of reference for everything. It's the basis of all true education in her mind, and a knowledge of God, an understanding of God. Of course, we gain that through nature, general revelation, and providence, but we gain it more directly through special revelation, through the inspired writings of the Bible. And so for her, education had to have its point of reference always back to the Bible and Bible principles. Not that the other issues of science and anthropology, and we could just go on and on, all of these other areas are not important. They are. But in her mind, they all have to have a point of reference with God and the divine. And so that to her is the fundamental, I think, the fundamental principle of education. And secondly, education needs to be practical. She was very emphatic about the importance of the practicality of education. Now, this is where the classics, it is useful to be able to read in the original language these things. So we wouldn't say it's a bad thing. It's a good thing. But is that how we define how much a person knows and how capable they are educationally? In her mind, no. It's more important that you had the Bible and that you had a practical way then to apply what you have learned in life, in whatever type of ministry for God that you were doing.
Both James and Ellen White talked about the fact that an educated mind would be more receptive to the message of our witness to the world and how we could translate that to the world. So we have all of this going on, and then outside of Adventism, there were some of the same challenges in secular education in the United States, where all of this started for us, and in Europe. There were both U.S. and European influences around. It is interesting then to note that early pioneers were not afraid of looking outside the church for guidance, for some inspiration, for innovations concerning education. But they always measured everything by what we know, what they knew then from Scripture. And of course, they had the prophet among them. So Ellen White was there for guidance as well. So our pioneers took what we knew from the Bible as fundamental principles of education.
Brújula diligente hacia la voluntad perfecta de aquel que conoce el fin desde el principio, la Biblia siempre ha sido guía fundamental de quienes desean seguir los consejos divinos. Pero inmerso en un mundo confundido, lleno de ideas y teorías, de cuestionamientos y dudas, por momentos se hace difícil para el ser humano comprender en plenitud el mensaje de la palabra de Dios. Es para esos tiempos que Él envía a sus profetas. Estas luces menores que apuntan hacia la luz mayor, que recuerdan a su pueblo el camino por el que deben andar.
I don't think we would have a school system if it were not for Ellen White. It is amazing how her ideas that started with some major concerns about the public educational system and how people were not getting a wholesome, full education. She came up with some ideas, and over time she developed those ideas. And as those ideas developed, she also began to emphasize the need for schools.
Porque ella puso los fundamentos, primero a nivel conceptual, y luego, una mujer muy práctica, cómo se hace educación, cómo se la financia, cómo se la administra, cómo se obtienen los profesores, cómo se los forma, cuál es su misión. El papel de ella es fundamental.
She was an avid believer in education, particularly Christian education. She was a great supporter when they started the college in Battle Creek, and she started the college in Healdsburg, which is just north of San Francisco. Started Avondale College, and she was a supporter of a lady by the name of Mrs. McKibben, who actually rented a house from her in Healdsburg. And Mrs. McKibben wrote the first curriculum for Adventist elementary schools. So Sister White was a definite supporter. When she was here, she helped to establish Pacific Union College, which Healdsburg College moved up to Angwin, it was called. In fact, her very last message was a talk at Pacific Union College. And at that time, she held a Bible up and she said, "Unto you I recommend this book." So education was extremely important in her teachings.
You know, Ellen White is an amazing woman. The range of her ministry, the issues she dealt with, is huge. I don't think any of us or very few of us really fully grasp the range of the issues, because we tend to pluck out a statement here and there when we want to make a point, so we are selective in this. But she has written about issues of education. Even people who are not part of our church read it. They read the book Education and are amazed at the insight that this woman had into the educating of a young mind. So I think Ellen White has made an enormous contribution, and continues to do so through her writings, to our understanding of education.
Considerando las limitaciones del ser humano, su dificultad para entender los nuevos conceptos, su insistencia en ignorar los preceptos y cobardía para quebrar paradigmas en su nombre, Dios se revela al hombre progresivamente. Abre lentamente sus ojos hasta que pueda divisar la luz admirable que ilumina la vida de quienes se entregan a Él. Luz que llega de la forma que Él considere correcta y en el momento que determine oportuno.
Ellen White did not write anything about education for the first 28 years of her prophetic ministry. She did write things about parenting, about educating children at home, but she never wrote anything about schooling. But in 1872, when they decided to have a school in Battle Creek, she wrote Proper Education. That was the beginning of a writing ministry on education that was just up until the time she died.
Ellen White's writings on education were initially more in the form of testimonies. You find special testimonies, you find the testimonies for the church, you find letters and counsels that she's writing. Extensively, she writes in this way. But at first she's not, or for quite a while, she's not publishing a book per se. It's more the living dynamics of what's going on in the church and the prophetic gift interacting with it. Finally, there's a feeling we need to do something. And so David Paulson compiles a book, Christian Education, which brings together some of these counsels and other materials. And that's published and it's used. And there's a few other publications. And so there is some published material from Ellen White to help with this.
There were two books that came out. One on Christian education, which I believe was, I think that was the title of it, 1893, and then Special Testimonies on Christian Education in 1897. Both of those books are now out of print. But in 1903, she wrote her classic, just titled Education.
Ellen White finally, after she moves back to the United States, after being in Australia, in her, we almost say the retirement years, but that's not really a fair descriptor because she's very active. But she moves to Elmshaven, California, and writes a number of very important books. One of them is Ministry of Healing, which is the very important book that deals with health and becomes kind of the spiritual baseline for health in 1905. But in 1903, she published the book Education, which lays out the spiritual principles of education.
Lo que hace ella es rastrear en ese libro la educación desde antes del Edén hasta la tierra prometida. Y entonces nos lleva de la escuela que está en el cielo y que después se traslada a un programa de extensión al Jardín del Edén hasta la escuela del más allá. Y entonces ata como con un hilo de oro todos los movimientos de escuela que hubo a lo largo de toda la historia de la Biblia. Y entonces lo ve como una escuela, por ejemplo, la época de los patriarcas, con la educación de sus hijos, ve como una escuela el movimiento del desierto, ve como una escuela la educación de Jesús en homeschooling, y ve como una escuela la escuela de Jesús con sus discípulos. Y bueno, y entonces mira cuáles son los elementos en común y encuentra algunas cosas que yo rescato, que son de mi cosecha. Probablemente haya más. Uno de los asuntos claves que es un hilo común es que Dios y la Biblia son el fundamento, que nosotros podemos ir a la Biblia para encontrar el fundamento de la educación y que al ir a la Biblia nos encontramos con Cristo como el Salvador y que eso es esencial y que la Biblia es el fundamento para todas las materias, para todas las disciplinas. Finalmente todas las materias se arraigan en una raíz que es una creencia y o depende de la Biblia o está en contra de la Biblia. El segundo aspecto es que la educación es más que el desarrollo mental. Dios nos creó como con un chip completo y necesitamos un equilibrio en el desarrollo físico, mental y espiritual un equilibrio en el uso de nuestra jornada diaria, un equilibrio en el uso de nuestra proyección, un equilibrio. Y la educación tiene que atender a eso. Un tercer asunto muy importante es que la educación está en el medio de un conflicto entre el bien y el mal. Y eso ayuda a explicar muchas cosas. Un niño le dice a su maestra, señorita, yo me quiero portar bien, pero no me sale. Y al lado de él está sentado uno que sí le sale portarse bien. Entonces, ¿por qué a este no le sale y este sí? ¿Este es mejor que el otro? No, son maneras como se ve el conflicto. Y entonces la educación trata justamente de llevar al estudiante y al maestro a encontrarse con Cristo en medio de ese gran conflicto. La educación nos prepara para la vida, la educación nos prepara para el servicio. Si no desemboca en el servicio no tiene sentido. Y esos son elementos que ella encuentra a lo largo y los presenta ejemplarmente en ese libro. Realmente el libro La Educación, para nosotros los adventistas y para la educación en general, es decir, trasciende las barreras de lo que significaría la educación denominacional nuestra para enriquecer la educación mundial de todas las épocas, porque no ha perdido su vigencia.
Para la naciente educación adventista y para el mundo, Elena de White dejó claras en sus escritos las bases filosóficas y pedagógicas necesarias para entender la desafiante idea de que el trabajo de la educación y el trabajo de la redención son uno. Idea que además de comprender, se debe emprender con el objetivo supremo de transmitir el conocimiento de Dios vigente y activo en cada aspecto de la vida presente y futura.
This puts the whole issue of education in great controversy terms. It deals with education as salvation, as a part of the great controversy between Christ and Satan. That is her classic book. If people can only read one, they should read that one. But then in 1913, just before her death, she died in 1915, she had her secretaries begin to compile articles and unwritten material she had on education. And that book came out in 1913 called Counsels to Parents, Teachers, and Students on Education. That book is still in print. Education is still in print. In 1923, they began to collect more of her articles. And that came out as Fundamentals of Christian Education. Meanwhile, they still hadn't captured, those three books are still in print. Education, Counsels to Teachers, Fundamentals of Christian Education. And then about 1968, the General Conference had a educational convention and they developed a book called Counsels on Education. And that's all of her counsels from the 9 volumes of testimonies from the church. So how many books did she write on education? Well, depends on how you count them. But we can say for sure that she has 3 books on education that are still in print today. If you take a look at all of them, there might be 6 or 7.
Her writings about education were many, and we are still discovering more and more even today as those in the White Estate continue to comb through all of her letters and messages and articles of various types to glean information, inspiration concerning education.
Tanto a Bíblia quanto os escritos de Ellen White são fontes inesgotáveis de conhecimento pelo fato de não seguirem o método científico. O método científico já é semi-digerido. Então, todas as ideias que você vai colocar ou você se encontra ali estão todas sistematizadas. Pode ser um artigo, pode ser uma dissertação, uma tese. Todos esses materiais normalmente têm que definir o problema, falar do propósito e da metodologia que vão usar e alguma coisa a mais. Mas tudo sistematicamente já colocado para você. Na Bíblia e nos escritos de Ellen White você não tem a natureza sistêmica ou científica. Se você quer estudar o amor de Deus na Bíblia, você tem que começar do Gênesis até o Apocalipse. E ao você fazer esse estudo, você vai fazendo a sua própria sistematização. Então, há uma diferença entre você ler o jornal local e você lê uma vez e já conhece tudo que está escrito nele, praticamente, a segunda vez não tem mais interesse, e a Bíblia, os escritos de Ellen White, que você pode ler e ler e ler e sempre aprende.
The book entitled Education, the book Education, is the most basic. It is the one. If we had nothing else, we could, and any institution or any system could take that one book and build an entire system of education. She touched on everything for education, on teachers, on leadership, on students, on parents, on curricular content, on methodologies, on outcomes. She touched everything. And then there were those others that came along that we use fundamentals, and messages to parents, teachers, and students. Even her books on psychology, those kinds of things, the 3 volumes, all of those come together for a very strong message base from Ellen White on education. Even her messages on health, of course, have to do with education. Everything really can be tied back to and into education.
Elena G. de White fue sobre todas las cosas una mujer que amaba a Dios, una enérgica luchadora que desde muy joven entregó sus fuerzas, sus dones y su vida para predicar el mensaje de este Dios al cual amaba. Un mensaje que concibe al hombre como un ser en el cual lo físico, lo mental y lo espiritual se deben desarrollar equilibradamente para que logre la verdadera felicidad. Y es en este contexto que la educación se vuelve fundamental como un puente entre lo teórico y lo práctico. Una forma en la cual todos estos libros, sus conocimientos, sus consejos y el mensaje que Dios le dio se vuelvan más que letras y palabras, se conviertan en un estilo de vida.